Hello, Global Theater. My name is Gerry Fialka. Today is November 29, 2024. I want to thank Rob Grant and his amazing podcast, I'm Probably Wrong About Everything. Please subscribe. Also want to thank Carolyn Casey, the inspired and inspiring Coyote Network News. So important in my life. She introduced me to today's guest, Michael Stocker. Where are you calling in from, Michael?
I'm in West Marin, which is about maybe 15 miles north of San Francisco and a little bit closer to the coast.
First question is, what is the best thing for a human being?
Oh, in such a diverse world, I would say gratitude. Seeing as we just came out of this Thanksgiving holiday, gratitude is really important.
That is a great word. I never get that word. Thank you. What's your favorite form of information? How it comes into you?
Oh gosh, I'm a reading fool. I've got a stack of books always nearby, but also I just like going around, pawing around in nature, and
Yeah.
nature really does it.
I love that verb, pawing around in nature. But let's go to reading for a second, divert. Did you become a reader, one, because your parents told you to? Two, they did it as an example, or three, on your own?
My mom had a point of pride. She wanted to make sure that all of her kids read before they got into kindergarten. And she had a lot of success with my sister, who became a lawyer and was reading at 3. She was pretty brilliant. But I had to sit next to my next older brother and go through this stuff, and it was really tedious. So it was hard initially for me until I started reading science books,
Yeah.
and I have a report card. Had a report card from when I was like 7 or 8 years old, and the teacher was worried I was reading too much nonfiction.
This
So,
is brilliant. You really get what I'm after. I appreciate it, Michael. We're here to have fun, and that was really cool. So, why do you think humans collect or gather information?
well, I think that's really, our curiosity is really kind of baked in the pie. I mean, it's other animals will assimilate information, and there's some thinking animals that do linear, that basically put things together, like the corvids, like crows and ravens and things like that. And I also am now starting to realize a lot of fish. We don't think fish are very smart.
Yep.
There's some fish that are pretty smart, but they have a limited, they have a limited environment that they're in, so
Yeah.
they don't really need to collect, the Regis Joyce, for example.
Yeah. That was good. Baked in pie. And it sort of answered the next question, but I'll ask it anyways. Is this need or want to collect information more innate or more invented?
Well, we're adaptable. Human plasticity and behavioral plasticity is really one of our hallmark, characteristics. Um, but that being said, there are some people who really like, it's like some people, 1 out of 10 people likes to make decisions, and the 9 out of 10 don't. And that's why we have these leadership, models that we have. The people who are worried that their decision will somehow screw up and they'll somehow be punished, or they'll somehow make a mistake. But then there's the curious ones who just, okay, we screwed up that way. Let's see if we can screw up another way,
Yeah.
and get ourselves out of this predicament.
That's like we're going to go into thinking. That just reminds me so much, saying predicament. The Marx Brothers are in a predicament, and one of them says, "We've got to think," and the other one said, "We already tried that."
That's good. Yeah.
Dude,
Okay.
and think about, speaking of thinking, do thoughts create emotions?
Oh, well, they're all woven together. Yeah, it's all part of the same
Yeah.
fabric.
Yeah.
And this is really, our challenge, certainly my challenge right now, when, it looks like the fabric of a republic is being rent, is to not let the thoughts that I have about it interfere or cripple my emotions. Last time these guys had their hand on the tiller, I ended up in the hospital with nerve because I got an infection because I was thinking too much about, it was affecting me. And so I that was a lousy strategy. So
fill in the very good, Michael. Thank you. Fill in the blank. I don't know what I think until I.
It's just a running track for me. I'm always knowing what I think.
Wow. Well, that's funny because McLuhan says, I don't know what I think until I say it. Joan Didion says, I don't know what I think until I write it.
Interesting. Oh, so, because, and this is it a thought or an opinion? I mean, in terms of forming opinions, that's a constructive process. Thinking in terms of just synthesizing what's around me or following a train of thought so I can develop some larger idea, that's a continuous process for me. But actually developing an opinion, that's a constructive exercise.
Yeah. Can humans think without language?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Chomsky says a language is not just words. It's a culture, a tradition, a unification of community, a whole history that creates what a community is. Michael, what do you do when language doesn't work? When language breaks down, what do you do?
Well, I do a lot of writing. So when language breaks down, I had this conversation with this woman. I've known her for a long time, and she's challenging because she's constantly metering what she thinks I think about what she's saying. So she's, I'll say like a sentence, and then she'll build up, this continuous narrative about, but and it's really a strange form where I'm having a conversation with two people, her and who she thinks I think she is.
Yeah.
It's crazy. So, I mean, people do differently.
Yeah. But that's interesting. You say when communication breaks down, you're saying you write.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's good.
One of the things that I kind of inherited from my dad, I think, more than anything else, he was a technical writer. He was a technical generalist, but his writing he was really good at breaking down complex technical systems into language that is easy to understand, and it's not insulting. It's not like So he wrote like flight manuals for the SR-71 and stuff like that.
Yeah.
You have pilots who basically they think they're God, and you have to tell them, which button to push when the red light goes on.
That's good. Well, your observations of humans in general, are we more thinking beings or more feeling beings?
Well, I mean, we have a lot of different. Speciation is pretty, pretty broad. I dated a woman many years ago. She had spent a few years studying with shaman down in Peru with the Guerrero people down there, and they don't have 5 or 6 senses. They have 9, and they don't sense. Their central sense collector is not their head; it's their belly, the Cusco. That's where the word Cusco comes from. It's kind of the center of sensation, and so their decisions are informed, and they are informed. They're not just imaginary things. I mean, things like the shadow and the name, and if you look at, for example, the Egyptian pantheon, the Book of the Dead, they talk about these 9 elements that are all weighed into the soul, the body, the person. So I think that Westerners become reductionist about how we assume things because, it's this whole rational, the Cartesian thing. If you can measure it, then it's real.
Yeah.
But how do you measure sensations of truth or lie or deception, or there's a lot of nuance to that.
Yeah. Yeah. You're anticipating a lot of our questions. I appreciate it, Michael. These are two questions from Alan Turing in the 50s. One, is thinking a function of the soul?
Yeah, I think that the organism, the human organism, it's a fabric. It's not, as much as the Cartesian, Reformation idea of segregating the responsibility of the soul and responsibility of the mind into two separate buckets. I don't think that's a very useful distinction to make.
Yeah. The second Turing question is, can machines think?
No, they can assemble.
Yeah.
And the way they assemble is they take, I have not messed around with AI, and people have that I know, and it's the great plagiarist, and so it's basically combing through scads of data that's already been fried, and does it come up with an original thought? I talked to somebody, and he said that there was an AI conundrum that he put into, and the answer came out in the context of a deliberate lie. To lie
Wow.
to, yeah, and that was concerning. That all of a sudden and I wish I was recall this clearer, but they were looking for an answer from a particular person or what have you, and the chat or AI decided that they would be more likely to get an answer if they posed themselves not as a human being, but or not as a particular type of human. I forget it was, but it was interesting because the AI basically went to the second level where it said, I'm not going to get the answer I want unless I deceive, the person I'm questioning.
Wow. Do you more pursue happiness or more pursue meaning?
I sometimes think that I'm a mind that's dragging my carcass around with me. So meaning is the thing that seems to drive me, and that, do I get happiness as a consequence of that? Um, I have reasons for being dissatisfied. I started working for myself in 1981 because working for other people, I was putting all my heart and soul behind other people's endeavors, and it was like, and they were making bad decisions. So I guess that's happiness is in terms of meaning. I mean, meaning makes me happy, I guess.
Yeah, I got it from Viktor Frankl's book, Man's Search for Meaning. He says happiness doesn't tend to last, meaning tends to last. Does the brain more detect consciousness or create it? Like, is consciousness there bubbling away and we're more so detecting it, or are we more so creating it?
Well, I mean, I think really we're wrapped into this place of how we synthesize what
Yeah.
meaning is around us. And,
Yeah.
I mean, Viktor Frankl comes out of this rationalist tradition. But, if you ask that question to a Gero, just a native Gero person, it wouldn't make any sense to them.
Right.
They don't
Yeah.
make those types of decisions.
Yes, some of these early questions are almost like false dichotomies, but they're also, you don't have to answer the question. They're just prompts to get us to talk, but it's also the word more is kind of tricky because a woman said to me once, the word more doesn't function in your question. Like, are we more detecting consciousness, or are we more creating consciousness? Well, of course it's both, and it depends, but I'm after your like hunch or your guess.
Yeah. Well, I think that I've got a vocabulary which I've been dragging around with me, an emotional, experiential vocabulary, not a
Yeah.
But I've been dragging this around with me, and it's I've been modifying it over the years. But I had a really amazing couple of friends of mine. I used to play in this band, and we play once a month at this massage school, and all these bikinis and people would just dance, and we'd improvise completely. And there was a couple of women there who pulled me aside and spent about 2 or 3 hours with me, telling me about what codependence is. And I realized what cued them off is that I was basically holding up a lot of the band, but I was doing it behind somebody else and supporting them. And it was really an epiphanal conversation. It had me realize, engineers are naturally codependent. Let me fix that for you is an engineer's, go-to phrase. But, and that's a foundation of my discipline. But I realized, no, sometimes you just have to watch people fix it for themselves. And, I hung out more before, but for a long time with a lot of Native American folks. And they, they have other assumptions about the hierarchy of experience that they bring to bear in their deliberations with each other and with other people and what have you. And so it's not something where they formulate answers.
Right, because this is what you said, emotional vocabulary, really touched me deeply, because the word codependency is sort of like, well, all humans are codependent, but then it became a fad illness or a fad, like I can cure your codependency, and it became more of an issue. Whereas it's like, how do you find the balance is more important than saying,
I'd say we're interdependent. That's important.
Yeah.
We depend on each other. But the codependent thing, at least as I understood it, was essentially that you are assessing what other people's experiences, and you're attempting to modify that, enhance it, advantage it, whatever. It was an interesting business. It was a worm box business, and I was in business with some clever people, and I would navigate the business strategies. This is back in the mid '90s or something like that, in such a way that the outcome I wanted would present itself to everybody. We lost some.
Yeah,
there it is.
You froze up. Yeah, you froze up there. But go ahead. I'm really intrigued on what you're talking about. Yeah.
Yeah. So we get someplace, and it wasn't something to advantage me particularly. It was just my idea of how the thing would run smoother. And because I'm a smart guy, it wasn't wrong. In terms of what we were going to pursue or another. But they were up more than once and go, how did we get to this place? And I realized I was surreptitiously positioning experiences in such a way that it would lead them without them actually making the decision. And that was cuckoo. That's codependent in the worst sort of way. I was basically trying to design the pathway for all of us for our mutual success. I was not trying to advantage myself. But it wasn't overt. I wasn't sitting down and saying, okay, this is what I think, and this is how I think we should do it.
I'm curious if the term effects precede causes is applicable in what you just described. Like Edgar Allan Poe invented the detective novel, which is reasoning backwards. And he was like, oh, I'm going to give you so much information, and then you're going to fill in the rest. And that's going to swoop you into the experience of my book. And then the symbolists were spawned out of Poe. And Mallarmé said, hey, don't paint the painting, paint the effect that you want to have. So there's this term called effects precede causes we've learned from studying Joyce and McLuhan. Is that what you were talking about a little? The effects precede the cause?
I guess that there's they kind of dovetail or intersect. Yeah, I could say that.
Yeah.
But this, we weren't creating art; we were trying to create business. And
Right.
the outcome is. I uh, uh, I met this guy, Robert Young, who was a painter back in the 70s. He used to paint these really fantastic underwater reef scenes, with fishes and things like that. And they were, it was realism, and they were big. I mean, he would paint these things, and banks would buy them. And, they'd be like 8 by 8 feet or even larger than that. And you'd ask Robert, so how many fish are in there? And he wouldn't know. What was really marvelous about his stuff is because he, if you've ever been scuba diving or skin diving, you get down there and the way that the light dapples from all these different reflective areas. So you don't really get a same sense of, when you're above water.
Yeah. Amazing. Wow.
It's pretty clear with light.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I want to ask you later on what's the difference between art and science, but before we get into that, a few more of these background. What's faster, speed of light or speed of thought?
Well, the measurable nerve impulses is definitely slower from between point A and point B than light. So that's kind of an odd question. Yeah, for the physics of it, light, obviously.
Yeah.
Actually, both of them, I think.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I was cooking yesterday. I had my finger something hot, and it took a second for me. Wow, now what?
Broke up. Yeah, you broke up there about your finger and your cooking. You might repeat that if you could. We didn't hear it. Oh. So Michael's website is there, ocr.org. Please visit it, and he is present.
Yeah, we're not. I'm gonna put this on my phone. My Wi-Fi is a little squirrely, I think. So let me change my connection over to my phone.
No worries. Thank you, Michael. Yeah. Yeah.
My God, I love that guy.
And so, as I was saying, we were encouraging people to go to your website, ocr.org. And you ready to go, Michael? Oh,
tell him to go look at that.
Let me see. I have not connected this yet.
Okay.
Network, internet, personalization. Wi-Fi connect to. Well, what's wrong here? Am I back up on the screen there? Because I'm not finding my phone.
You are back on the screen, and we can hear you.
Okay, well let's just play with that for the moment, and if we need to, we'll revert back to the phone.
Okay, but we didn't get this. We had the story about you cooking in your finger. We didn't hear that.
Oh, so I'm moving hot things around on a barbecue, and I burned my finger, but I didn't realize it until it was too late. Now I got a blister to remind me how slow I was responding. So,
yeah.
And that was just between my finger and my brain,
Yeah. Well, Audre Lorde, the poet, said you can't dismantle the master's house using the master's tools. Yvonne Rainer, her colleague, said you can if you expose the tools. What new tool do you suggest?
To dismantle the master's house?
Well, that's a good question, Michael, because basically I opened some of the questions with cute quotes, and it doesn't mean you have to apply it. The basic question is, what tool do you most gravitate towards? You can add the word new if you want, and you can apply dismantling the master's house if you want.
Oh, there's a lot of fish in that bucket. I don't know what to think about it. Um, maybe, if I were to have a tool that would help me navigate more flawlessly,
Yeah.
what would that be? Um, I'm pretty good at letting go of things, but I'm sure, I'm not the best judge of that. One of the things, I'm writing an essay right now based on the operating questioner, why are white guys so mean?
Yeah.
And it sounds like a mean question, but what I'm really finding is that it really hinges around intergenerational trauma. We don't think about our own trauma that much. But if you look at the 900 years that the royal families were kicking around their serfs and sending them off to war to fight their own, bar fights and just ridiculous stuff. I mean, I just read last week that between 1900 and 1914, there were 4 large wars in Europe before World War I set in.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys, that's all they could think about is how to beat each other up. So,
Yeah.
and when you're so submerged in that kind of consciousness, I mean, I remember as a kid, I mean, probably until the late 60s, early 70s, that when you talked about strategy and war strategy, these guys were considered heroes. They would play these war games. It's like, why are you doing this? Why are you efforting so much to kill people? What is the outcome that we're looking for? So that's intergenerational trauma. I'm sure I have my trauma. I mean, I had to go through a bunch of bumps, but it took me 40 years to individuate from my parents. But that doesn't mean I'm not still traumatized with assumptions that are interfering with my efficiently being able to unfold and reveal my dreams.
It's really deep. I wrote an essay called Can Art Stop War? And it was basically based on metristic civilization. Maria Gimbutas, the archaeologist, and Rianne Eisler, they say maybe we're more hardwired to be cooperative than for war. So most people think we're hardwired to have war or violence. And I'm like, no way. But the way culture has dictated it to us, like you said, history, movies, books all propagate warfare. Is like, oh no, that war was needed. I'm like, no war is needed, in my opinion, being a pacifist, but I was raised, in the same culture. I mean, we're both raised in the same culture. So I think this line you said, interracial trauma, it's like, how are we brainwashed to believe that? Go ahead, Michael.
Intergenerational trauma.
Yeah, intergenerational. Sorry, yeah.
It does sometimes reveal itself as interracial trauma, but it's intergenerational. But when I was working in Quantascazzi, I had the opportunity to work with this guy, Michael Honig, and Michael's a real sweet guy. In fact, I'm going to see him in about a week. He lives with his wife now in Spain, in Ibiza, in fact. But that movie just changed my whole social agenda, all our social agenda for a decade to come after that. But he was a Tangerine Dream, and one of the things that they sponsored was this Meta Music Festival in Germany, where they brought musicians, world musicians, top tier world musicians from other countries, and this was in the 70s, to play in Germany. And so there was a Meta Music, and some of these people had never been on an airplane before or whatever. It was a perfect time to do that. But he brought this group of Tibetan monks over who were all musicians to play, and he said he was walking with them in downtown Brooklyn. They would look, the windows and the stuff that people were selling, and they would just bust up laughing because of what are these things that are, what's going on here? They did not have that sense of exchange experience, which dominates, value or wealth exchange experience, which dominates Western, our Western inquiry.
Yeah. Very deep. So what new toy do you suggest?
Oops, there we go. Yeah.
Can you hear me, Michael? Oh.
My my phone up. That would mobile hotspots share your internet connection. Maybe I'll try that on and see if that works. Okay, what's available networks? It does not want to give me my phone. Okay.
What you could do is go out and re-enter if you wanted to try that.
Dead here. Oops, this point. If you have a little more time, what I could possibly do is go and turn off and turn on our server or router.
You can try that.
Let me try one thing first.
Yeah, go ahead.
Let me empty my cache because sometimes that causes problems too.
That's a smart move. Yeah.
We'll see if that did anything. We'll move ahead. Hopefully we don't have to bring out the
right. And whatever you need to do, that's fine. You could always go out and reboot and come back in and do whatever you need to do. But since I asked you about the tool you utilize, then we go into what toy do you recommend? What toy do you most navigate towards, or what new toy do you suggest?
Anything that makes music.
Oh yeah, there you go. And so what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Yeah.
Okay, Gary, you know what? Let me turn on and off the server. So this is going to take a couple of minutes. And maybe should I exit this?
You can exit because that might help too, and just come back in. And I'll just be talking about your website and whatnot, and then you come back in when you can. No hurries, no worries. Thank you so much.
See you in a few minutes. Yeah.
Yep. So listeners might be aware that Michael is a bioacoustic. I can't even say the word properly. ACOUSTICIAN. He's a naturalist. And that is his trade. His avocation is a musician, and he plays improvised jazz music. And he started the Ocean Conservation Research Organization, which is the website that we recommend you access for more information, ocr.org. And he is indeed a scientist as well. The name of Michael's book that came out in 2013 is Here Where We Are, Sound, Ecology, and Sense of Place. And he did work on the film by Godfrey Reggio, Koyaanisqatsi, which came out in 1982. And being that experimental film is one genre of cinema that I've investigated for 50 years, we were very intrigued when Koyaanisqatsi came out. in the early 80s, because we had seen that type of filmmaking in the Ann Arbor Film Festival for years. In fact, Hillary Harris sort of pioneered it. And it was interesting because Godfrey indeed went to Canyon Cinema in San Francisco and watched a lot of films, and went on his mission to make an experimental film that was indeed shown in normal popcorn movie theaters. And boy, were we impressed. And it had somebody like Lucas or Coppola's name producing it. But there it was, experimental film in a normal Hollywood movie venue, eating popcorn. And it made a huge impact on people. And soon you were seeing the same technique of pixelation and fast frame visual techniques in TV commercials. And the movie soundtrack for Koyaanisqatsi was Philip Glass. And then that became a dominant style of sound that permeated documentaries for many, many years. So it was definitely a highly influential film, Koyaanisqatsi. And Godfrey Reggio is currently, in 2024, still active. And he just released another film and has made many films since then. But Michael worked on that, and his pursuits engage this phenomenon of noise in the ocean. Like, I indeed thought this term noise in sea, SEA, in researching this conversation with Michael was amazing, because if you go to the etymology on the word noise, the first thing it says is the sound of a musical instrument. Then it says outcry, clamor, which implies noise is something that's kind of not comfortable to the ears. And that's what most people, I think, believe the word noise to mean today. It's like, oh, that's noise. Well, then Etymology Online tells us that the word noise is rooted in the Latin word nausea, Nausea, which means seasickness, which really goes full circle to the fact that noise in sea is rooted in the word noise, etymologically, in seasickness. That indeed what Michael's exploring is how noises in the oceans, in the seas, has negative effects. And he's taken upon himself in ocean conservation research to detail these problems and how we can address them. So here is Michael back. Hi, Michael.
Hey there.
Very good. So I was able to tell the listeners a whole lot about you, and we'll get into it. So the next question is, what do you worry about when you go to bed at night?
Oh God. I don't want to get into the fall of the republic, but that's what's bugging me now.
Yes.
You know, I mean, everything else works out okay. The interference that we're getting is. Well, give me an opportunity. Sorry, I took the opportunity to get my tea when it was crashing again. I'm
No
going to
worries.
call Comcast and give them what's for.
No worries. Yeah.
What?
So, yeah, we don't need to go too deep into all that, but if you want to say anything more, I mean,
you know, I mean, I think the end of democracy happened when Bill Clinton signed the Telecommunications Act of 1996 into law.
Yeah.
And it took what was the fourth estate and commoditized it.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's I mean, Donald Trump is pornography for the press. I mean, they just can't, you know, they can't get enough.
Yeah.
And it's not helping. And I had this exchange with Leslie Moonves back in 2001 or 2. I could look and see when the letters came in, but I was basically, you know, reading the Riot Act for basically, you know, having CBS follow whatever it was at that time, some lurid thing. And he responded, you know, it's not good for democracy, but it's really great for CBS.
Oh God, yes. He was bragging that. Yeah.
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 So that's our challenge right now. I mean, we have, you know, I think, I mean, some of the hinge points we have is, you know, when Ronald Reagan came in and brought in this neoliberal idea that we were no longer citizens living in a society, we were living in an economy.
Yeah.
And, you know, the metrics are really easy when you're just talking about how many dollars flow. But when you talk about quality of life issues, it gets more complicated. But that's not what we're doing right now. Yeah. And I don't know if I mean, the oligarchs crashed it in 1929, and it took 3 years of starvation and homelessness for people to say, you know what, you guys, you know, get your hands off the wheel. And FDR came along. But, you know, the moneyed interest, you know, these guys who have $200 billion, they have a certain, you know, we haven't made a distinction between wealth and value. And they have wealth. You know, if my neighbor was collecting, you know, National Geographic date back to 1960 and had boxes and boxes of this stuff, you'd think they're, you know, they have a problem. But these guys are collecting money like that. They're kleptomaniacs. And they don't understand. I mean, the numbers, nobody's, I mean, I like to use this, you know, back of the envelope when Jeff Bezos was valued at $200 billion. If I wanted to collect $200 billion, I would have had to, you know, be making $95,000 an hour around the clock since 1776. You can't do good things with that kind of money.
Yeah.
I mean, you could if you were a thoughtful person, but these guys are afraid, you know, they're individuals that have a frailty. They're kleptomaniacs.
Yeah, I want to continue on with my script, but I want to divert right now because of what you just said. Utah Phillips, the folk singing, brilliant folk singer, said, "Anarchy is making rules for yourself and not other people. Who's entitled to make the rules?"
Well, I mean, who has the courage to do that? When we're talking about governance systems right now, the divide and conquer breakdown of civil society are the things that are making it very difficult. You know, management, leadership, these are, you know, they're important characteristics, but if they're hijacked by the wrong people who don't have sentiment or compassion, then we got a problem. You know, they're seeking a result that that looks good on paper, but doesn't pencil out very well. And on the one hand, so what's leadership? I had this guy, Sam, who worked for me back in the mid 80s. I had designed an electronic product and we were manufacturing, and I had a bunch of folks basically stuffing and soldering and, assembling this thing. And Sam was pretty good at metal stuff. And I had a metal thing I wanted to make, because we were still in prototype, so I wanted like 10 of these particular pieces of metal. And I gave him a finished piece and I gave him 10 blanks. And I said, Sam, make 10 of these. And, at that time, I felt everybody was self-governing, that they did that they all kind of thought like me. It's like, okay, here, you figure out the best way to do this. And I looked at the drill press like 10 minutes later and Sam was just staring at it. So I went over and I said, Sam, you okay? What's going on? And he says, Michael, I want you to tell me exactly what to do and exactly how to do it, and I'll do the best job I can for you. But I don't want to make decisions. And he gave me a huge gift. First off, he basically said, you can make decisions. I can't. And what had probably happened to Sam is his dad had a metal shop in Mexico City, and Sam, took initiative and tried to do something, and his dad beat him up about it. And so Sam was like, oh, I don't make decisions. And I think that's the case. As I said earlier, like 9 out of 10 people don't want to make decisions, they want to think for themselves. They would rather follow. But that means that the 1 out of 10, if they're cockeyed, if they, sociopaths, we could be in trouble. And unfortunately, we're giving the microphone to the sociopaths.
That's amazing. Really, you're really articulate and concise. And I appreciate it, because the word freedom is etymologically broken down as same thing as Utah Phillips said. Freedom is one making rules for oneself. What does freedom mean to you now?
Well, we tend to think of freedom as being unconstrained. But, it's like this mosh pit idea of liberty. What is liberty to the people who are bandying that word about? And freedom, it's, my freedom to be a bully and not have you interfere with it.
Yeah.
And that's not a human trait that I would like to cultivate.
Yeah. Wow. And so you sort of anticipated this perfectly to get back into it. McLuhan learned from a poet that artists are the antenna of the race. And artists is a broad term. It's the art of what you're doing, ocean conservation, the artist as a jazz musician, the artist as a painter or as a poet. They're the antenna of the race, and they're broadcasting and detecting the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, so we might learn how to cope with what we don't like about our inventions. So, Michael, I asked you the question Marshall probed his whole career. Why do we ignore the hidden psychic effects of our inventions, even though the artists are broadcasting them to us?
Well, this is part of this idea of commoditization.
Yeah.
I heard somebody on the radio yesterday saying that impressionism as a label for art was initially pejorative. It's like, this is not representational. This is just their impression. Actually, that's a useful framing. We need to actually dwell in our impressions and share those with each other.
Yeah.
But prior to that, because it was really a threat to realism. And, and where did it lead? It led to abstract expressionism. That now, do we have that now? I have not been following contemporary art, except for the people that I know, and there's no, as far as I know, there's not really schools of thought, that there were, 50 years ago or 100 years ago, what have you. Or 50 years, yeah, I could say. But so it's individual expression right now, and does that titillate the imagination of the viewer, of the one who's experiencing it. I mean, I remember when I was a kid getting introduced to what was called free jazz. You know, Cecil Taylor and John Coltrane and Eric Dolphy, and it was much, much later that I understood that all those people became extremely excellent at structuralism. They knew exactly what their tools were. And you listen to this stuff. When I listened to it back then, I didn't have the ability to be able to sort it out. I was, you know, I had Western harmonic canon, and you know, it sounded like these guys were just expressing themselves. And there were people who had these bands of sorts that were just God, I mean, I don't know what it sounded like. I'm just actually reading a book by Phil Lesh right now and searching for the sound. It's surprising. I never was a Deadhead, but these guys, and particularly in the beginning, these guys used to eat heroic amounts of LSD and get up on stage and play.
Yeah.
And I think the only reason why it made sense is because the audience also were eating heroic amounts of LSD. But
yeah,
there's this one, I'm in this one section right now where he, you know, it was unbelievable amounts of LSD, and he didn't even, I mean, he was, and who knows what it sounded like.
Yeah.
You know, but they also operated under this assumption that there was this kind of larger group psyche that would drive the experience of everybody, and if it was good, it was good. I don't know how. I mean, I think one of the things that shifted our thoughts about that was the Altamont love-in that happened, which was a disaster.
Yeah. What you said about the Dead, I was a Deadhead before the Dead. They were called Deadheads, but you know, eventually the Dead sucked on a lot of times. They were just like Rodney Bingenheimer said, the Dead killed rock and roll, but they persevered and eventually brought Ornette Coleman up on stage with them and Billy Cobham. So they were bringing up the great jazz improvisers, or, you know, like you said, I mean, Ornette in a lot of ways is a structuralist. Amazing that you apply that word, but it is funny because both Warhol and McLuhan said art is anything you can get away with. So I mean,
yeah.
You know, and Michael, sadly, one time I said that, and they said that sounds like Trump, and I'm like, oh no, but it's also McLuhan loved that the Balinese have no word for art. They do everything as well as they can. So again, when I say the word artist, I mean all occupations humans can pursue, basically, because this question is, do artists have moral obligation?
I think we all do, you know. I mean, when we talked about those hearings on the NEA, where it was Richard Serrano, and John Mapplethorpe, and Karen Finley, those are the three that were brought up with.
Yes, very good. Yeah.
And Karen Finley, you know, she just was radical. The stuff she did on stage really was, you know, trying to shake our tree.
Yeah.
And she did it deliberately. But then, you know, John Mapplethorpe, so Ed Asner, who at the time was the head of the Screen Actors Guild, was called onto the floor in this hearing about art. And for those people who don't know Robert Mapplethorpe's work, he did these really exquisitely crafted and developed photographs of homoerotic activities, right? And it's not Ed Meese, who was the guy who was top of my head, who was the head of that.
I know what you're saying. I think it's Meese. And Serrano, just so people know, Serrano's the guy who stuck a crucifix in a mayo jar full of urine, and that freaked everybody out because they were saying the government's giving this guy money to make this and call it art. I mean, yeah, go ahead with what you're saying.
Yeah, so Asner handled it really well. There's a picture of somebody urinating in somebody else's mouth, and the question was, you know, Mr. Asner, do you think this is art? And Ed said, I don't know if it's art or not, but it sure represents supply side trickle down economics.
That's trickle. Well, that's like something I just discovered last week, that McLuhan says all words are metaphoric. They're all made up. Every word is made up to mean something. It's metaphor. But then there's a word that goes like this, literal. So then you go, well, are you speaking literally or metaphorical? And then people go, well, no, I'm speaking literally. And then, well, then is literal a metaphor? So there's a lot of, what Ed did there was sort of flip a literal question into a metaphoric question and made a point even better, probably,
Yeah.
or he made his point.
Unfortunately, the NEA was, had been really stripped. In the 70s, I knew people who made a living, artists who were good artists.
Yeah.
Who were making money either through the NEA or through the New York. New York had also an arts fund, and there are people who were making really reasonable money, making our lives more intriguing because they were embellishing it, sometimes with beauty and sometimes with just bizarre questions.
That's it. Questions are important. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas?
You kind of walked out there for a second, but I think you're asking me if I'm afraid of new ideas or old ideas.
That's it. That's the question.
Rephrase the question. I want you.
Yeah. Are you more afraid of new ideas or more afraid of old ideas? Yeah, that is the question.
I'm afraid of no ideas. That's the problem. We're getting to a point where there's no ideas.
That is well done, dude. No one's ever answered it that way, Michael. Thank you. You're a unique human, and I'm really honored. Can you conjure up your earliest memory ever or one of them?
I lived in a college town about 40 miles east of LA, and it was really at that time, very, kind of residentially. The moms were stay-at-home moms, and we had a few, house moms. Like my mom, when there was some kind of conflict that came up, the kids would gather around, get help sorting it out with my mom and her sense of reason. Dorothy Elwell, she was kind of the social, helping people deal with their social conflicts and things like that. Suzanne Reckard was, you'd go to her if you got hurt, she'd fix you up. And so there was that type of thing. And it was a fabric of us kids. And do I remember, I was up on my hind legs, by that time. Do I remember things that I was on the ground? I don't know. At some point in time, I never had any kids because I saw this coming, but I did live with a woman and her child for a number of years. I met him when he was like 9 months old, and little Eric. And she was a singer in a band that I was in, and Eric saw me, the father, her son, typical 70s thing, as soon as he was born, I can't handle this. And he left her to be a single mom. Anyways, Eric reeled me in, and I got a great opportunity to spend from like 9 months to about 4 years old with his child, and watching the assembly of reason, the understanding of the other, that I'm not the center of the universe anymore. The terrible twos are really expression of, oh my God, I have to like deal with other people and their needs, and there's times, they just like throw themselves down on the ground and just like, and I wish I could do that now.
Yeah.
Really great way.
Yeah, you're a liberated human, Michael. I appreciate you saying, because do you think memory is more a curse or more a blessing?
Oh, it's a blessing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
you talked about your dad a little. Tell me someone within your immediate family who had an impact on you, and what specifically was that impact?
My dad's gone, but I loved him dearly, but he was also very wounded. And both my parents. My mom's mother died when my mom was 4 years old, and they say that you don't really advance emotionally when you have your after you have your first kind of childhood trauma, and that you actually have to start dealing with it, or you don't grow. So anyway, my mom made it all the way to about 4 years old. My dad, I don't know what happened, but I have a clue. But he made it to about 2.5. So he would have these temper tantrums like I was talking about a second ago. But he was a brilliant guy. I mean, he was really absolutely brilliant. So I mean, I think I inherited things from him. But then, I'm a musician, and it was one thing that I probably did better than, at the time, did better than anybody else around me. And my dad, had one of those father-son talks with me. He had 2 father-son talks with me. And one of them was, Michael, you're smart. You can do anything you want. Just don't do music. Okay.
You're kidding.
What a gift. And then it was earlier than that. In sixth grade, I think maybe 7th grade, I read J.D. Salinger's
Catcher in the Rye. Yeah.
Well, it was 9 stories by, and
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So anyways, I liked his writing style. And so I aped it, and I kind of wrote a short story in the style of, Perfect Day for a Banana Fish or something like that. And my English teacher thought it was really good. And she showed my dad this story during a PTA night or whatever it was. And man, he just came down on me like a ton of bricks. Like, don't write that stuff. He wanted me to write, I don't know, just like, and it was literally, decades later that I said, oh, the reason why he didn't want me to write like that, it was good writing. It offended him.
Wow.
When an 11-year-old kid can offend somebody with his writing. So, and it was literally, God, it was 40 years later when I finally said I individually went to my parents, and I actually realized, wow, actually I'm a writer. I can write, and that's, a large part of what I do now. But it was something that, my dad was a good writer, but he never thought about it that way.
So what did you get mainly from your mom? Did she have the same attitude as the dad, or did she support you and say, go for it?
She was really supportive. And, she wanted to see us succeed. She also was hands-off enough to not interfere when it was going off her rails, which was good. But she also, she was kind of resigned. The combination of when my parents passed on, they lived with each other for 70 years. They were married for 63 years, but they died within a few fortnights of each other. My dad lasted a little longer. And then on the way down from where we had the services for them, we were visiting. They would go on this road trip and then visit these old friends that they knew from when they were kids. And this one woman said, Hugh, my dad, he was always in the library. And he said that when my mother came in for the first time, she said that the whole library filled up with bluebirds. It was so palpable that these attraction these 2 people had for each other.
Wow.
So, yeah, it was really amazing.
So now
I wouldn't want to have their relationship, but they did it. They did it, and they're heroic about it. And they died. They died honorably.
70 years together is amazing. I'm really intrigued by that. But the same question, Michael, outside your immediate family, someone who had an impact on you, and what was that impact?
I would say that I had this piano teacher, Osborne Rager. And Osborne, so I started studying piano when I was 4, and I had this Miss Breitner who shared all the joys of Stalinism with me as a piano student. She was literally striking me and yelling at me and stuff like that. So by the time I was 6 and I was coming home from these piano lessons crying, my mom said, you know what, this is obviously something not working here. And so she helped me up with Dorothy Elwell's brother. Actually, Dorothy was one of the block moms, and her brother taught piano, Osborne. And Osborne was going through a spiritual kind of reinvention. And while he was a kind of not a very good classical piano player, so my classical style remains crappy, but he was studying music theory and teaching that to me. So by the time I got to college, I got to skip the first 2 years of theory in music school because Osborne had just, given me all these tools of harmony and rhythm and theory and structure and whatever. So I would say, and I haven't thought about him for a long time, but I'd say, he was probably somebody who influenced me in an important, long-lasting way.
Again, really articulate and concise. Thank you, Michael. Did your parents raise you a particular religion?
They were obligatory Protestants. We went to a congregational church down a few blocks away from us, and I was in the choir of that church. Ann Koppel, who was the choir director, was really excellent. In fact, we had a situation. We were the boys' choir in the St. Matthew's Passion that college put on because Ann was such a good choir director. But the sermons and stuff like that never intrigued me. They were a little too didactic or what have you. And then the church, this was during the Vietnam War, the church joined the United Church of Christ, and they had a deliberate position against the war, and my parents flipped because they were very conservative. So they left the church, but they left me with Ann Koppel, so I was still in the choir. And then my parents went to this other congregational church that didn't join the UCC, and that they had 3 choirs. They had the children's choir that was dressed in white, and they had the women's choir that was dressed in red, and the men's choir dressed in blue. And for the big occasions, they had red, white, and blue up on the stage. That was that church. I never went there. But it wasn't really a religion.
Yeah.
My dad, I think he had an underpinning of spirituality which couldn't really be described by the church. He was very well read, and but I think the church didn't really serve his intellect.
Do you pray, Michael?
Oh yeah, all the time.
If God exists, what would you like God to say to you after you die?
What's been said all the time, I walk outside. That's it for me. It's like
You mean it's always being said to you in what nature's saying to you? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. I mean, my task is to try to remain grateful.
Yeah.
And it's hard sometimes when the type of interference that we're all running into right now is hard to be grateful. But when I really look at it, I mean, even so, one of the challenges that certainly I have, but we all have, is that I really tied into nature, and I'm an avid mushroomer, but about 10, 12 years ago, I started the crickets. I live out in the country, and so on a summer night, you should hear crickets all the time. 3 or 4 species. They started disappearing, and for the last 15 years or so, it's quiet, and nobody's studying crickets, but I know what's happening. They're suffering. They show up every once in a while in various places, but I have a paper in review right now that is about wind farms and the infrasonic noise generated by wind farms. I have a feeling this paper is going to be a little bit of a disruptor because it's looking at this low frequency noise which birds use to navigate. They have to hear the weather. And if they can't hear the weather, they don't know when to get up in front of it or when not to get up in front of it because, their flight conditions are really important to them. If they're putting 3,000 wind turbines along the Atlantic flyway, and those are all, 30% of all birds that migrate between South America and North America go along that flyway. And that's just above the water. And then, while we'll never be able to find out for sure until it's too late, whales use infrasonic sounds to locate themselves as well. Either the sounds their own sounds that they're making, the low frequency sounds that they're bouncing off of geological features in the ocean, or the sound of the ocean itself, waves beating on the beach and whatever. They use this to navigate in long distances. And this guy Chris Clark wrote a paper. It's not, you can't really, it's just something you can't prove, because you can't do the null the null hypothesis would be brutal. But following humpback whales that migrate from the Gulf of Alaska down to Hawaii, they don't just beeline it. So that's not magnetic. They're not doing a magnetic navigation. They go over to this seamount over here. They go down to this channel or this ridge line, or they follow geological. So his feeling was that they were locating things through sound. And it's either their own sounds, because they can make sounds. You can hear humpback whales 3,000 miles away in the ocean. And are they using those sounds as echolocation, bouncing it off the surroundings, or are they using it to communicate to others who are 3,000 miles away? Well, it would indicate, if these animals migrate in large groups and have breeding areas and feeding areas and whatever, that they don't need to communicate 6,000 miles or 3,000 miles. So, it's informed speculation that these animals may be using low frequency echolocation, like the dolphins use high frequency echolocation. Anyways, if we disrupt that, because those low frequency signals that come off of the turbines with basically the blade vortex interactions, which create the thumps. That's the thumps you hear when a helicopter comes by. It's the same thing, but it's lower frequency. So if we're creating that kind of hash down there, I can only imagine. And unfortunately, we're taking an outsized impact on our surroundings. So it's hard for me, when I go out in that prayer of going out and just experiencing creator and creation. It hurts me that I'm seeing it disappear the way it is right now. And
well, Mike, Michael, what I'm grateful for is, I loved you say to remain grateful was an amazing statement. I'm grateful that you do ocean conservation research. And I was wondering, just did you get this sense of being grateful? You said gratitude right off the top, more from the way your parents raised you, or more on your own?
I would say on my own. I mean, my parents had a structural spiritualism that I don't think they could really. I mean, I remember I had a vegetable garden one time, and the first time I brought harvest of the garden so we could have it on the table, my dad was tickled, and he talked about eating the ancestors. And I think that's it was kind of clever. So I think he had a deeper spiritual stripe than what he would necessarily articulate. But that was one, the fact that we're, it was a cycle of life,
Yeah. And then the other thing you just said really touched me, because you mentioned Eric Dolphy. And, I'm a huge fan of Eric Dolphy and Sun Ra. And both of them have articulated, like Ben Sindrin asked Sun Ra once, you worked with Fletcher Henderson. Did he influence you? And Sun Ra says, no, the birds and the crickets influenced me. And we've gone to Eric Dolphy lectures where they literally say he used to listen right here in East LA to the crickets.
Yeah.
And that's what influenced his sound. So I love you talking about the sound of crickets. Do evil people exist, or does evil use people as a vehicle?
Yeah, how to calibrate that? No, I think people are wounded. I think evil people, who we would consider evil people, people who are inconsiderate, who are not grateful, who are self-absorbed, that's a wound, That's, and I mean, evil, there's deliberate evil. You know, I mean, I was out in the Saline Valley Hot Springs one time, and I was trying to find the place, and there's a lot of not homestead, but people basically are doing staking claims, like mineral claims out there and stuff like that. And I got off on the wrong road, and I obviously was lost, and so I started driving back, and I saw this guy crossing this bridge in his truck, in his F-150, and I approached it on foot, and this guy just, you know, he asked that I not talk to him on his side of the truck. He wanted to talk to me through the passenger window, but the way he indicated it was like this on the other side. But this guy just was dark. He was not a nice guy, you know. I don't know what his wound was, what his distrust was, but I think he, you know, his calculus was that people are either going to serve me or kill me. It was unfortunate this guy dwelled there, but unfortunately I didn't have to deal with him much longer. He gave me an instruction, but yeah, I mean,
well, Michael, the hidden question really is how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? And I'll set it up. Alan Watts says, if you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them. Coppola stole from the mob and the samurai, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. JFK said, forgive your enemy, but don't forget their name. And Fellini says, I need an enemy. So it's a lot of thoughts. The basic question is, how do you advise someone to deal with an enemy? But first, how would you respond to Alan Watts? If you acknowledge your enemy, you empower them.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's one of the things. I think there's an Atlantic piece that was just a couple of days ago, and you know, they were advising people to not get, you know, tangled up in the shit show because, and they said, and I wish I had it right in front of me, it was well articulated, but essentially, this guy is basically distracting us with all this. Oh my gods! And
yeah,
in the course of that, he's wearing us down. And
yeah,
and they advised, you know, I mean, wait till the shoes drop before you start, you know, sweeping up the blood. You know,
yeah.
And I think that's vital. And I don't know if this guy, when the first time this guy came into the seat of power, it was brought to mind the book that the Foundation trilogy by Isaac Asimov. You remember reading it? Yeah.
Yep.
So essentially, to condense it, the story is that there was a savant who had managed to come up with this that the governable universe had gotten way too large to be governed by little fiefdoms and kingdoms and republics and whatever. It's just way too messy. And so he came up with this mathematical formula to be able to unify everybody and not have all these little potentates and fiefs, and you know, that it was basically run by a council of statisticians and a council of psychologists, and they would get together and they would figure out, you know, what are the possible responses to this particular policy issue, and what are the probabilities of it going this way or that. So that was the governance, and they had like a 20-year window that they were going to try to get it all to gel, so that the objective was to have the highest quality of life for the most living beings. And it sounds good. Then the fly in the ointment is the mutant, the mule, and the mutant comes in, and what the, you know, tension in the rest of the book is like, did this guy who had passed on figure that he have a variable in there for mutant, you know, takeover of this whole process? And so I saw, you know, Trump as a mutant. I mean, and I don't know if he's thinking this through himself. I don't think he's got that kind of genius. I think he's kind of a savant, you know, an idiot. And, you know, when you can say that overt intentional lying is protected by the First Amendment, but objecting to that lying is not.
Yeah.
You know, and it's like there are people who believe that stuff, you know, it's turning the whole thing on its head. And with enough, you know, and yeah, I don't know, it's hypnotic.
It's really a challenge. And so this other guy, Nassim Taleb, says games were created to give non-heroes the illusion of winning. In real life, we don't know who wins or loses, but we can tell who a hero is. Then villains don't think they're bad. They want control. Heroes want freedom. Gregory Bateson said, if the criminal gets caught, does he go, whoa, my criminal skills weren't up to snuff? Or does he go, oh, I did something morally and socially wrong? So again, it's a lot of prompts. The basic question is, does punishment work?
Well, I mean, some people make mistakes, you know. Some people screw up. They you know, and they think that they're on the right side until they get, you know, somebody calls them out for it. But there are people who are inherently bad. There are people. I mean, I don't know where it comes from, but there's this kid who I watch grow up next door. He's now a nice kid. You know, he's gone to college and stuff like that. But when he was 4 or 5 years old, he tried to set people up to hurt themselves. And I saw him try to set a fireman. You know, it was a fireman here, you know, checking out, trying to set this fireman up to hurt himself as a 4-year-old kid. That was really weird. So it was some kind of perversion of his own internal landscape, which I think he's probably navigated through because he's a nice enough kid now. But there are people who literally, you know, I work with a guy. In fact, when I invented that electronic product, I was initially in business with this guy, Tom Edmond, and I say his name out there. I don't think he's alive anymore. But Tom, you know, when he had entered into a negotiation, he wouldn't enter into it. It was always, you know, somebody's got to win and somebody's got to lose. And he would not get into a negotiation unless he was going to win. And it's a more complex story. The last time I heard his name spoken, it was the State Department calling me, asking if I knew where this guy was, because he had apparently pulled some maneuver on somebody in Malaysia who happened to be a senator in Malaysia. And at that point I said, you know, if he's alive right now, he's probably doing better. You know, he's lucky, but his kneecaps are probably in a jar somewhere, because you don't mess around at that level. So I think he met his end of that. But he left me with a, you know, I invented this thing that we were making money on and we were selling, and he was snatching all the money and left me with a $60,000 liability in 1982, 83. You know, it was just a mean guy. And did he? I mean, if you pulled him to the curb, he did something that explains his. He was going up to Cal Arts. He was studying film, and Cal Arts used to be really a free school. They would keep all the labs open. You can go if you had an idea at 3 a.m, you'd go and, you know, grab a camera or whatever you needed to make that happen. And that was what it was based on. He went and stole $80,000 worth of camera equipment at 3 a.m, and his rationale was, those idiots, what do you think anybody's going to do? Somebody's going to steal this, so it might as well be me.
Wow.
He ruined it for everybody so he could, you know, steal his shit.
That is heavy. I got to tell you, because I did the U.S. premiere of A Gary Wrath of God by Werner Herzog in Ann Arbor, Michigan, before we even screened in New York, just by a fluke. And then Herzog was there at the screening, and I asked a question, you know, student filmmakers in the audience. Excuse me, Mr. Herzog, you stole a camera to make your first film. Do you encourage students to do that? And it's like, this guy, Tom Edward, but he fucking maybe took that too literal.
I don't know what the story was. What did Herzog respond? I mean,
God, you know what? It's on a 1/2 inch reel-to-reel black and white videotape somewhere, hopefully, and I don't remember. That's the sad thing. It's 50 years ago, and I wish I had, you know, I remember. Anyways, that's funny you brought up Cal Arts and filmmaking, because the next question is just that. James Joyce was the first projectionist in Dublin 100 years ago. He basically checked out. He said, why should I go inside a building and see a movie of a tree when I can go outside and see a real tree? Years later, Faulkner said, sometimes the best fiction is more true than journalism. Why do we have to recreate things in order to get them? Why do we have to go to a theatrical play of people acting out life? Why don't we just live life?
Yeah, I think it's a matter. It's a matter of degrees. I mean, why do I read books? Because I can basically get to synthesize a lot of great minds without getting too far away from my desk. On the one side. On the other side, when I was like 12 years old, we got a color TV.
Yeah.
I remember that. Wow, I got a color TV, RCA Victor color TV. And we got something happening now. Wow. So we got this color TV. And it was, I was doing all of this, the lineup was Hogan's Heroes and the Munsters and the Addams Family and all this other stuff. And it was, they had $1 million movie at 9:00 at night, and they would have these festivals. And why do I always forget her name? Burt Reynolds, and who was Burt Reynolds always doing movies with?
I'm just guessing. Angie Dickinson. I'm not sure.
No. She was a tease. She was a prick tease. And, she would like bend over and almost spill, and then they'd cut away. And I did a week of that as a 13-year-old kid. I said, you know what? Life is not long enough to wait for this to happen on screen. So I stopped watching TV. I mean, I literally just dead stopped.
That was smart. That's why you're so brilliant, Michael. You stopped watching TV at age 13. Hallelujah.
Yeah, for 5 years or so, if I was in somebody's house and they turned the TV on, I wouldn't even say goodbye.
Man, that is brilliant.
So that's I mean, as I say, it's a matter of degree. The question you're asking in terms of how do we engage? Should we watch movies or not? Well, am I going to watch? I mean, the Barbie movie apparently had some social questions that were worth asking about feminism. I didn't see the movie because I don't need to ask those questions. But are there good movies? I remember when they had the Columbine disaster, and they had congressional hearings on it, and they had these television producers on the House floor, and they're asking questions, and one of the questions was, why is it that you have such violence? Why are guns so featured in American television and movies? And this guy said, well, when you got a conundrum, you only got 58 minutes to produce your piece. You can solve a lot of problems when a gun comes out. You can change the whole narrative with a gun. And then Michael Honig, who I mentioned earlier, who I was working with on Quintescazzi, he ended up doing movie soundtrack work after that, and commercial stuff and whatever. And I was waiting for him at his studio one time, and he came back from a screening, and he said, if I see one more American movie with children solving problems with guns, I'm going to vomit.
Yeah.
It's correct. So we have this narrative that somehow guns are part of our culture, society. It is. It has become that.
Oh, yeah. Well, studying McLuhan, you learn that all inventions have services and disservices. And if you have suspended judgment and not take a point of view, you can suss out how these inventions shape our behavior. But it doesn't mean in your lonely room you can say, I hate this. So I tend to go and, not have a point of view. I say, guns, TV, and cars ruined us. Those three things
Yeah.
are just horrible. But
Yeah.
again, you can use TV, use YouTube to educate people about ocean conservation. So, and I'm it's hard for me to suss this out. And I think your line, a matter of degrees, really sussed it out, because Pascal, the mathematician philosopher, says in order to know anything, you have to know this end of the spectrum and that and everything in between. That's kind of like comprehensive awareness. You study the patterns and you get a comprehensive awareness. So, you've talked about, Michael, your tipping points, how you got into music and how you got into ocean conservation in a lot of your videos and somewhat today. But let's just go into the ocean conservation. Where's that tipping point where you said, that's my calling, to start this organization and do this? I mean, you said early in your life you loved nature and that's, you connected with it. But where did you figure out that could be your calling? Because you've gone through a lot of career things. I think you really specified how you got into writing, and that was clear. But I'm curious, that ocean conservation, where did that become your calling?
Well, the tale I like to tell on this, which condenses it, is like a lot of us who are my age saw Jacques Cousteau's and Louis Malle's movie,
Yeah.
Monde de Silence, Silent Worlds. And just the title set my field back 20 years, no doubt. But that being said, I wanted to be a marine biologist when I was a kid. And my mom, she'd take me down to the beach and she'd plop me in a tide pool and she could, crack a book and be done for the day.
Yeah.
And so that, when I got into high school was hard for me. The first year I was very attentive, but after I got bored really fast. I was looking forward to the biology class, and I had this biology teacher who had this remarkable ability to make biology boring. I mean, it just like, I don't want to do this, And so I fell back into doing music, and I found that people who got paid most reliably in the music field were people who were technical. So I studied signal processing and electronics and acoustics. I was up at Eastman School of Music, and all this technical stuff, which I ended up becoming pretty good at. And then in '92, the Navy was proposing a communication system where they were going to sonify the entire ocean so they could talk to submarines. And being a musician and understanding sound and acoustics and the mathematics behind that, I said, that's a crappy idea. And I ended up going to the public hearings, and most of the people who were concerned about it were, coming from the biological field, and people were proposing it were physical oceanographers. So they didn't understand each other's language. I understood how to bridge the communication between them. And that was in '92. I continued to kind of pursue it, and organizations like NRDC and Earth Island and other were asking me to write white papers about noise in the ocean. And then I became a science advisor. One thing led to the next, and by 2000, I was ready to take on OCR. And it looks very cockamamie from where when I was sitting in the tide bowl, but looking back for where I am right now, it's a straight line.
It's a straight line, exactly. And so a screenwriting teacher told me great art, great film is when you can clearly see the intention of the maker. Kubrick says the opposite. Great art is when you can clearly not see the intention of the maker. What role does intention play in your creative process as a writer and as a musician?
Yeah, that's a good distinction to make. As a writer, I basically want to allow people to inhabit a perspective, a point of view that gives them information about what I want to convey to them. So I write nonfiction. I don't write fiction. I don't know if I could write fiction. I could try, but I don't think so. For this very reason, because my intention with writing is to provide clarity, and with nonfiction, or music, it's to provide lyricism. It's something, I mean, I guess more and more, less and less artists, expression, they don't tell people what they're trying to paint. I mean, when it's
No.
realism, but it's like whatever you derive from that, it's your relationship with what I had a relationship with while I was making it. And to tell people how they need to perceive stuff that's not art. That's the opposite of art. Art's, it titillates the imagination.
Yeah. Duchamp said there's no art without an audience. How much are you thinking of your reader when you're writing, and how much are you thinking of your listener when you're playing music?
I, at this point in time, don't think about I do. If I'm writing a piece intentionally to affect some kind of thought process in a group of people, like our ocean noise blog, we've got about 3,000 followers. A lot of them are scientists. A lot of them are academics, and a number of them are policy people. So, I write to inform those people because it's the field I work in. I've written articles for different, and I think about that. I mean, this piece I'm doing right now on why are white guys so mean?
Yeah.
I'm not sure exactly who my audience is right now, but what I've found, the excavation is leading me to amazing inquiry about European culture and its impact on the world. And so it will find its readership. I'm not aiming towards that. When I'm playing music, I'm just trying to express myself. What I hear. We had a great Thanksgiving yesterday, and typically what we do is everybody cooks, and then when the cleanup is happening, we've got a handful of musicians who are real good, and we play music while people clean up. There was this one guy yesterday, and he's really, I played music. I've been in bands with him forever, and he's a great woodwind player, sax and flute, whatever. I don't know what's gotten into him, but he's like, he was a ship without a tiller yesterday. I was like, good Lord,
Well, I like what you said. Your intent in playing music is did I hear this right? To provide lyricism.
Yeah, that would be good. Just something.
What's another word for that, Michael? What does lyricism mean? Especially what you're playing is not so much music with words, or you don't mean lyrics, you mean lyricism. What is that? Yeah.
Well, I mean, there's all these metaphors like harmony and development, theme development, stuff like that. It's a journey, and I'm on that journey, and hopefully, as I'm doing it, people find it, it's a mutuality that they enjoy being on it as well.
Yeah.
But it was so weird about this other guy yesterday, because this woman, Mariah Parker, who's a fabulous piano player, and she's got an album out now that it's definitely, it may be the last album that we see a Paul McCandless on. He's getting old, but and I wish I had the name of it, but Mariah Parker's Indo-Latin Ensemble. Beautiful stuff. Anyways, we were getting ready to kind of dive in, and this guy was playing his flute, and like both of us kind of turned around and walked away. And I said, well, it's nice, not good enough. Put 11 in there and see what happens. It's like both of us just immediately said, okay, let's stay away from that till it settles.
Well, Mike, I asked for 90 minutes, and we had that little tech thing, and it's over 90. One thing is, I was wondering if you could go a little longer now. If you can, I understand. And if we can maybe plan a part 2 down the road, because there's so much more I want to get into. I think you have so much to offer in being concise and articulate in so many ways. And I've really learned a lot. So can you go a little longer now, or do you want to?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, this is Friday. This is the day I'm usually wandering around picking mushrooms and stuff like that.
Okay.
So I didn't have any plans.
Well, let's go a little longer now, and then maybe down the line we can plan a part 2. So this thing that Marcia McLuhan said was everything we invent extends some humanness. So knife and fork extends our teeth. The shutter in a camera extends our, our eyelid maybe, and maybe even non-tangible, say religion or philosophy extends consciousness. What is the writing utensil, whether it's a pen or a keyboard? What humanness does the writing utensil extend for you?
Oh, it's just ideas, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm a writing fool. I you know I when I started writing my book, it initially started out as a book on architecture, and
Did it
then
really?
yeah, I was doing architectural acoustics at the time, and
Wow.
one of the problems I had is that people didn't understand what I was trying to convey in my design work. Is that we inhabit the places, and inhabiting it is more than just visual. There's so much more. I was doing a lot of work in museums and stuff like that, and I was having a hard time getting, this one contract. There's one guy who kept on getting the contracts because his model was different. He was doing this thing where you would have these headsets, earphones, and it's playback, and it would give you a tour of the museum. And he called the audience members an audience singular one, and it's not why you go to public places. You want to say, "Hey, check this out," or you might, you seeing somebody else. I mean, it's supposed to, in my heart, open up, discourse. I mean, community. They're community settings. So, anyways, I was doing those types of things, and I decided one of the reasons why I'm having a hard time conveying this is that people don't understand the vocabulary of architecture is not visual. I mean, visual helps out, but the whole Bauhaus thing that happened was really a reaction, a shock reaction of what happened in Europe when they bombed and destroyed Dresden and places like that that were just architecturally fantastic. And they bombed it. And then the Bauhaus guys came out with this very functional design stuff. Some of them are visually compelling, but they all sound like crap.
Yeah.
With rare exceptions. So I made a lot of money on Bauhaus, trying to, how am I going to make this place easier to talk or to make presentations or whatever. So anyway, so I developed all this kind of this vocabulary of, sacred spaces, public spaces, family spaces, the home, and yeah, place spaces. Anyways, I had this kind of vocabulary, 4 different, and everything kind of fit. For example, a school would be both a workplace. That was the 4th. School could be a workplace, but also a sacred space because you're, teaching children, teaching people to be part of your culture. So you would have both the vocabulary of sacred spaces as well as the workplaces there, or the home, and a like what the museum might be, a home and public space. So those types of things. So I was going to Europe and checking out sacred spaces because I was writing and the thing just blew up. I mean, it became this huge. I had probably 300,000 words on sacred spaces, following a certain canon of the use of irrational numbers in architecture. The book that I published could not hold that as well. So I have all this stuff. But, the question as to what is writing an extension of? For me, it's an extension of how I inhabit where I live, and words are one way of communicating it. Music is another. It's easier for me to talk about, the abbeys of Tholnay and the Sénac with words than to try to express it musically. So.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, what does the piano extend for you? What humanness? But let me just ask you, just before that, what you just touched on with the home and public, the school, work, and sacred. It reminded me of a book McLuhan wrote called City as Classroom, that it goes beyond, and he based it on things like the museum without walls or the concept of center without margin.
Yeah.
Is that sort of what you're talking about? The museum without walls, center without margins?
Well, I mean, McLuhan really inherited this place of, how do you convey, information. So he was the media thing, right? And he was occupying that boundary between uh, experience as presented and how we synthesize it, and on how that's navigated. And I guess you could say to some degree, but I think maybe where I'm situated in this is where we experienced it ourselves from, and that for me, because I sense it, because I can look at, what is it that did that. A lot of people don't necessarily analyze that conveyance there, but one of the things, like in Thornay, okay, there's these Cistercian abbeys and churches that are in southern France and other places too, but that's really mostly you find the beautiful ones there. When you go inside of them, because of the way the architecture is laid out and the use of irrational numbers in these places, you can, like, I went to Thornay on the day of the Assumption, and I try to always be the first person in these churches on special days like that, just to see how people come in and inhabit it. And the church sounded like it was inhaling me when I walked inside. And when you sing, instead of hearing your sound coming off the walls, it inhabits your body in a way that is just remarkable. And people even Corbusier noticed this, although he didn't take advantage because he didn't know this mathematical thing. But he recognized that they were remarkable. And I had a conversation with this woman who was a nun there. And she, it's just basically an abbey. She's living her life there. She's married Christ, and she's dedicated her life to that. And I asked her, and I quote it in my book. I said, what's your experience of this? How do you inhabit this? And she says, we're using this as an opportunity to prepare ourselves for that time in eternity when we will be facing the blessed rose of the Holy Host for eternity. And that was really amazing. What I found when I went in there, you could sing and hear it in your body, but I could also hear my anxieties and my fears.
Yeah.
I mean, it was a place to do internal work because you could feel it in your body because of the architecture. Yeah, stunning. It's really stunning.
That's amazing, Michael. So much resonates with what I study, because this is what McLuhan learned from reading Finnegan's Wake out loud with a group of people. But you realize that mid-career, McLuhan updated his aphorism, the medium is the massage or the medium is the message, to the user is the content. And that's sort of like what you said when you said inhabits the body, this idea of extension, how your body is extended. What does the piano extend for you? What humanness?
Well, I mean, this has been a challenge for me for the past couple of years now, because it's essentially, this is how I navigate my internal landscape.
Yeah.
And it's been so fraught, with the culture that we've degenerated into. I mean, it's very difficult. So I have been having a hard, before, up to like 2016, I was playing music of one sort or other, at least an hour, sometimes 2 hours a night when I at home, or a day, or what I'm at to. And I've been going since this disruption. I've been going sometimes for, a week and a half without playing any music at all. And it's troubling for me, because
wow,
the landscape is so, it's challenged right now. So,
Michael, this is amazing. Marshall wrote a book called Interior Landscapes about just what you're talking about.
Yeah.
But T.S. Eliot said it amazingly. He said, poetry is outing your inner dialogue, is outing that interior landscape. So, you've done this with writing utensil and the piano, but also what you reminded me of talking there, it spurs so many thoughts in me. I appreciate this. Is Frank Zappa said he learned what music was. That's by, he was in a church, when he was a teenager, and he saw the choir singing, and it made the flames on the candles move. So he said it's air molecule sculptures. That's what music is. You're sculpting air molecules.
That's Zappa.
Yeah, that's right. He articulates that in his book, but it is an amazing thing, because I think that's your awareness of how, Walt Whitman talked about this, how the human body is extended with all our inventions. We extend ourselves, with our inventions. So that's when it's hard, when you go, well, I didn't like how we extended ourselves with a car or a gun or a TV. But that's where you kind of you want to suss out, well, why did we invent this and how has it shaped our behavior? Because guess what? They're not going to go away. Sadly,
Yeah.
I live in a town, Michael, I live in a town where now Venice, California is a testing point. We see cars all the time and no one's in them.
Oh,
And
yeah. I've seen that in San Francisco too.
Oh, this is stunning. And I'm like, I'm on a bicycle and I'm like, dude, if I get hit by one of these, what do I do? You go, excuse me, you just hit me and there's no one in the car. So here's the big question I thought we could end with on this session. And I hope we can meet again, Michael. What's the difference between art and science?
Well, I mean, science really is specifically testing hypotheses that you either derive some kind of understanding or solution to that or not. But there's a methodology behind that. And I think that art doesn't have that methodology. I mean, the best art is something that springs free and allows us to explore worlds we don't understand. But one of the problems with science, as I'm finding, is that, there's a great book by Elizabeth Sartoris and and Harmon. Anyways, it's called Biology Revisions. It's a great book, and the scientific inquiry is predicated on making an assumption about interactions between things and then exploring that. And the metaphor that they use is, I'm going to study biology. And so biology is really how do organisms interact with each other and with their environment in ways that we can predict and through prediction, come to a more understanding. Well, so I'm not going to study that. I'm going to study physics. And physics is a study of how physical interactions and quantifiable energy states interact with each other. And so, the physicist goes this direction, and, the metaphor is this very Christian metaphor, is that we are inhabiting a realm of understanding and light. And we want to take that light out into the darkness that surrounds us. And by doing that, we're going to expand the light of understanding. And at some point in time, we're going to understand it all. And what Sartoris and Harmon say is, no. We need to look at biology as a circle, and the mystery is in the center. The darkness and mystery is always the center. And when we do that, you can say to the physicist, this looks like this from over here. What's it look like from over where you're sitting? Or you can go to the shaman. You can say, shaman, this is what's happening. I don't understand the interactions here. How do you frame it? At that point in time, it's not an exclusionary type of thing. It's reason predicated on trying to understand the mystery, which there will always be. It's not this Christian idea that you're going to expand understanding and lightness out into the world till we understand it all. Is always this, and it allows for more flexibility. I mean, one of the problems that I've had, I studied physics at Caltech, and I studied acoustics at Eastman School of Music, and I studied European intellectual history at Claremont Graduate School, but I never got a degree in any of this stuff. I just, I would get hired out of school, like, Mel Sprinkle, who was my acoustics teacher, I started working for him. I didn't finish the job, but I learned a lot from the guy. He was really good at it. But when I started getting in earnest, like in 2000, I started attending the Acoustic Society meetings and giving presentations. Initially, there was a lot of folks my age who were interested in, and they were all undergrads or just some of them were postdocs, but most of them were in graduate school. But I didn't have a degree, and it got to a point where a lot of these guys, did not give me any cred because I didn't suffer the schooling that they suffered. And it's now, 25 years later, they're realizing, this guy may not have a degree, but he's got a noodle, and so
effective noodle too. He's doing his action. It's not just noodling. But Michael, your reactions to Jean Cocteau's quote, "Art is science made clear."
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's Cocteau. He was not, I wouldn't call him Mr. Linear. I don't think the scientific methodology was really troubled him that much. So, but we need them all. We need creativity to figure out what we need to understand more, but we also need methodology to understand that there are interactions. Okay, we're limiting. Science right now is largely limited to the measurable.
Yeah,
and art is not constrained by the measurable, and so that I don't see them as dichotomous. I see them as supporting each other. But one of the challenges that we're running into is the emotionality of things like like medicine.
Yeah.
And we've kind of spoiled the inquiry because there are people with various, like I just wrote a piece about, because one of the things I've been doing is trying to understand the numbers we use to explain things. So metrics, and there are certain numbers that are used indisputably. And as long as we know those, and we can express ourselves in terms of the damage we're inflicting on the environment or what have you that way. But I'm working as a member of the International Standards Organization. And, it's a bunch of smart guys and gals who basically are trying to figure out how to express physical interactions in the realm of acoustics. And then we basically had, because of certain interaction between industrial uses of metrics and our scientific uses of metrics, we are collaborating with the International Electrotechnical Committee, coming up with standards that they can use in manufacturing. Well, now we got a situation where we, the science people, only want to clarify understanding, whereas the people who are in manufacturing want to, they want to clarify advantage. They want to decide standards which they have already developed and they use in their products, so that the standards will basically solidify their products in the market. And they almost ran away with this underwater Internet of Things, which is an acoustic standard. They almost finalized the standard before we had an opportunity to even talk about the physical layer, like how are these noises made, what do they sound like, how do they impact animals and stuff like that. And they were going to run away with it if we hadn't said, wait a second, you can't talk about all these layers of communication interactivity without understanding what the impact of the sound is on the biological environment. So we stopped it, but that's my latest piece. I don't think I've even mounted on ocean noise yet, but it's when you have somebody who has whose advantage is conferred to them by behaving in a certain way, they may not be friendly. In fact, there were these people who were just trying to say, no, we're done with this. You know, it's like, no, stop. Don't go so fast. And they're mad at us. You know, we're just trying to do science. You could say they're doing art, you know, manufacturing art, but, you know, without understanding.
That's important, Michael, because you're touching on this word McLuhan used in a comment about science. He said, when you push our paradigms back, we get history. When we push them forward, we get science.
Yeah. You know, I mean, a lot of this is really bracketed in this idea of rationalism, you know, in the age of reason, and the fact that there's a methodology and stuff like that. So, you know, I could say, you know, within the limited tools of that. But one of the things that I just excavated in this essay that I'm writing is during this time that was, you know, loosely called the Age of Reason, you know, with Hegel and Hume and Voltaire and all these guys. They had a methodology that excluded the sacred. The Catholic Church, you know, the Reformation happened, and now we had Lutheranism and Calvinism, all these other kind of very dour, cold climate religions, you know, spiritual things. But it was during that Age of Reason where they harvested 60,000 women and burned them and drowned them because they were quote unquote witches.
Right.
How reasonable is that? And, you know, the other part I'm reading about this is, you know, we always portray the witches as these snaggle-toothed, bruised, and, you know.
Yeah.
They were snaggle-toothed and bruised and green because the night before, when they captured them, they beat the shit out of them. And when they were pulling them into the public field to try them by fire or try them by, they were brutalized by that time already. What is reasonable about that? How does that reflect reason? I know. It's just, oh God.
That's it. That's that word normalizing. They've normalized that, you know. That's like John Waters, the filmmaker, when he watched Wizard of Oz, he rooted for the Wicked Witch. You know, it's wait a minute. But here you really touch on Chomsky's line, or you could comment on it if you will. We learn more about ourselves from literature than from science.
You're going to have to say it because you're breaking up a little bit.
Yeah.
So what
here's
was the
Chomsky says, we learn more about ourselves from literature than from science.
Oh, yeah. I think so.
Yeah.
I mean, we learn about our environment through science that we can't learn through literature in the same way necessarily.
Yeah.
In our interactions.
And what you said is, McLuhan started this thing called media ecology. And what I said, you know, most people think ecology is like save the whales, but ecology, doesn't the word mean an organism's relationship with its environment?
Yeah.
And so that's what's the difference between biology and ecology?
Well, ecology is less deconstructed. You know, you don't talk about the barnacle and, you know, and its hearing system. You talk about how the barnacle interacts with its surroundings. That's ecology.
Yeah. So let's close out with your reaction to Arthur Clarke. Any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Is that what you were touching on by using the word mystery, or is it something different?
That's different. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, technology, you know, that's a go-to for Western civilization. You know, we have this structure that we can rely on.
Yeah.
And, you know, it may, you know, be like Cas9 or, you know, or rocket ships, but it's, and magic to some people. Some other people do a lot of math together, but that's not magic. The mystery will remain the mystery as much as we understand. It will remain mysterious, and that's the beauty about it. We try to figure out, what's right or wrong in the context of interactive behaviors. Well, if we remove it from a social construct, if it becomes just, I guess, how come is it that the leopard preys on the baby deer? Is that a bad thing? No, it's not a bad thing. It's just what happens. And there's no value system to that.
Yeah. That's the poet Auden said, the mystery of art is that we don't know if it activates or pacifies us. So, that's, I think, to clarify the word mystery, how you use it is that we think we know all this stuff, but there could be a lot in our not knowing. So how do we unlearn what we think we know so that we can expand and understand the bigger picture?
Well, that's where we have to, whether it's intuition or a hunch or whatever, that we have to accept that. And, it may not be measurable. And the fact that we're using limited tools, I don't know all the other, if you will, inputs, sensory inputs that the Egyptians had, or the mystic, or not the mystics, but the shaman up in Peru. I don't know how to perceive the world with that. They do.
Yeah.
And they're informed by stuff that I don't even have a hunch what it is. So
I love your word hunch, because it reminds me of Lily Tomlin's great line. She goes, reality's just a collective hunch. And maybe we can explore in part 2, start off with this question: is perception reality? Because you taught me a lot of these guys in Peru don't have 5 senses. They have how many did you say?
9.
9. Well, what are they called again? What?
Well, they all come through. They don't come through the head. They come through the cosco, the belly. And there are things like the shadow. And the shadow makes sense, if the sun is shining, that is true as it gets. And the earth is on the ground, and that's as true as it gets. The shadow you see is how the body of the person interacts or interferes with or creates that shadow. And
well, that's Jungian too, isn't that? Jung talks about the shadow. But if I want to Google a term in this Peruvian sensibility, what do I Google? Is there a school or what?
I'm sure somebody's written something about it.
Yeah.
But, my girlfriend at the time, we met each other at about exactly the right time. She had her feet firmly planted 6 inches above the ground. You try to just go to a hike with her, and like every 30 steps, you're putting a little altar up for some, thing. So it's sweet, but it's like you don't really go that far. And I was Mr. Science, and I was so great. And she had to pull me out of that bag, and she did. So, and I thank her, because now I met a bunch of Native people, indigenous people, and I started a nonprofit organization that supports Native American elders. And I've done a lot of praying, sweat lodges and the Nipis, but Huipis and other types of prayer. But it also really, the perception that I have been able to be informed by these really marvelous elders is like, we are woven into this prayer. We are the prayer.
Yeah.
Part of this.
Michael, thank you so much for your time and energy. I really learned a lot, and I appreciate it. And I hope we can plan a part 2. Thank you. That was amazing. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Gerry. I really appreciate your interest. Yeah, and the opportunity. It's been a delight spending time with you. And if I ever get down to Venice again, knock on the door, go walk on the beach.
We'll hook up and walk on the beach. Yeah, my friend is the head of Venice Oceanarium, Tim Rudnick. And
I know that name.
Yeah, you
I
got to
know.
meet him. He's really working hard. He's doing a lot of work on this nature conservation in Venice. So thank you again, Michael. I'm going to hit the end broadcast button, but I hope this never ends and we can keep talking forever and ever. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Jerry. Talk to you soon.
Okay.
Bye for now.